right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. It's been a real pleasure already to be here. Had a chance to learn about ARRIGE through what is essentially a sister society, the Genome Writers Guild. And so for a talk that's completely different, this is the only gene editing you're going to see in my whole talk is this one little slide, and it's because my lab uses zebrafish as our pioneering model and then deploys it in mammalian systems. So we're not going to talk about any of that for the rest of the talk. We're going to talk about the consequences and why. So one of the key questions I get is why we have all of these great scientific conferences. There's the CRISPR conferences, and there's the FASIB and the Keystone conferences. Why in the world should we have ARRIGE? So I am on Twitter, and so one of my favorite Twitter scientists I follow, and his name is Bill Gates. And he answers this question. He says, actually, gene editing might be the most important public debate we're not having right now. And this is being said despite all of those conferences that I'm talking about. There is a fundamental misunderstanding and a huge gap in what we're currently doing and what's actually happening in the world today. And you may not know this, but in the upper Midwest, which is where we started, the first gene-edited products that are actually touching the world are coming out of. You saw one group Dan Carlson represents out of in St. Paul, right, or Minneapolis. Anyway, up in the Twin Cities. The first food product that you're ever going to buy is almost assuredly going to come out of Calyx, which is out of St. Paul. And there's more gene editing industry and companies in the upper Midwest than there are in Boston or San Francisco combined. There's a huge space and ecosystem that goes from Mayo Clinic trying to use these for new therapies to hornless dairy cows. And so this is an area where we are actually touching the world. And so as a part of that recognition, we realize that there's a ton of opportunities, and when groups like, obscure scientists like Bill Gates are telling us that there's important things to do, we've picked up the baton and moved forward. And I just want to highlight that, this is another tweet that was actually prior to that, which is that gene editing for good. He actually thinks gene editing can be enormously valuable as we address the problems of the 21st century. But there's things that we need to do. We should be able to make remarkable progress. All right, and there is great progress. This is probably one of my favorite papers I like to give. So this has completely caught me blindsided. Almost all agricultural products until recently outside of rice was clonal. So you had the ability to really predict, define, pick the traits, and then expand it. And the offspring have the same traits. But rice wasn't. You couldn't actually have clonal rice until recently. And that was made possible because of a combination of really clever scientists and gene editing. And so even this product, which is a huge product, is now clonal. There's enormous opportunities to advance and make the world a better place. But there's also a key concept. Gene editing, for those in the room, may not realize just how quickly you've come. So there's an old axiom that a technology that's 10x cheaper is a new technology. This is actual data from my lab. It was actually 25,018. We purchased a zinc finger in 2011. And that was one zinc finger. It actually didn't work very well. But we purchased it from the Sigma group out of St. Louis. And these are all cost points for gene editing over time. And it's whatever, probably in the hundreds of dollars. And what you're seeing is this huge, massive explosion of publications. Of course, this is actually from 2016. It continues to go up. We estimate that gene editing is 1,000-fold cheaper since 2011, not 10-fold and not 100-fold. That has huge consequences for who's going to use it and how it's going to be deployed in the wild. And I think the scientists misunderstand what this means. This isn't just that your ability to do your experiments is cheaper in your lab. It means that there's many, 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 many more people going to be doing the technology than you thought before. And many of you in the room may have even dismissed it from a point of view from the process because it's changing so much more rapidly than a traditional scientific field. This was a 2014 paper we published, just a sum of the organisms on the planet that had been gene edited at this time, and it's redefining what you define as a model organism. Basically, you can grow and culture and edit it, it's a model organism. That completely changes the site. We've heard a little bit more just about broadening the model systems, allows us to be better scientists in terms of model organisms. But I want to get back to this bit of gene editing for good. What does it mean? How do you want to go about this? And that's where the Genome Writers Guild got put. We were in a space privilege where we're actually touching the world, so we're not just doing research in the ivory tower. And so those of us put down the society, it's building a better future for humanity through genome engineering and public education. And we knew that being able to communicate that was going to be a big deal. So this is the society. We put it all together. Who are we? It's a really interesting group. It's researchers and physicians and students. And we've heard a little more about entrepreneurs. This group is sort of more reflective of if not a standard science meeting, a biotech conference, and we have posters and talks and high-end science at our meetings. But what has distinguished us from many of these other conferences is that we also have government representatives. This is probably our hallmark. As far as I know, this photo is the only such photo that's ever happened to date. So these are key government regulators with USDA, FDA, and EPA, the key government regulators in the United States for dealing with gene editing. And they came together, and they're actually in front of a poster session talking to a bunch of scientists, trying to become highly informed on where the state-of-the-art science is. And they gave talks on what the regulatory issues are and what are their challenges. We're actually talking. The regulators and the scientists and the public are actually talking about what gene editing is, what does it mean, and how we can work together to bring this gene editing for good reality to light. And they're coming back again for the conference in 2020. So we also have ethicists. We have had the opportunity to grab our Mayo bioethics group. Really has been talking about, this is a talk about really, are we at the brave new world for ethics? I think it's an important question. Of course, in the United States, germline modification called in vitro fertilization is entirely unregulated. So we live in a world where actually the human germline is being modified all the time in the United States, and yet there's zero regulation on any of it. At the same time, you have other groups worrying about it from the point of view of this. So this is this scenario. We live in a very complex time, but you need to engage the ethicists that are really thinking about this in addition to the public as well as the scientists. We also have, we reached out this year to try to grab a global network. We have a wonderful meeting. You might recognize a certain individual in this room. Also in the room is the Japanese Genome Editing Society president. We're trying to really focus on opportunities to work together. So just take you quickly through, we had our first conference was Realizing the Future. We really titled this because we were anticipating actual gene editing products entering the marketplace and people being able to buy these. So we thought it was important to get things started. 2018, although it's a bad name for communication, we called it the next revolution because we thought it was really trying to move on, realizing the future to sort of what's next. And then we learned, because we actually brought in science communication group to understanding that that's not the right way to communicate this with the public. We actually, this year, it was responsible CRISPR, and it was really trying to focus on how you leverage the high value, the gene editing of good, but what are the key considerations. We did this in Ames, Iowa. At the meeting this year, we had Dr. Yamamoto from the Japanese Gene Editing Society, and we actually brought in a science communicator. We actually have that as a theme. It was Carl Zimmer on She Has Her Mother's Laugh, and talks about sort of the history and ethicists of some key components. And I'm going to show you that there's a component of his talk that bothered me, and I actually used it as inspiration for moving it forward. We also had a certain other speaker gave a wonderful talk about ARRIGE and some science. It was well received. So this year, the next conference is going to be in July 23rd through 25th. It's hosted, it's going to be Rochester, Minnesota. It's hosted in partnership with the Mayo Clinic. And it's really pushing the idea of therapies. And we really do think therapies are coming soon. Just for a highlight, although there are only a few FDA-approved gene therapies, when I was visiting DC and the FDA gave a talk, at that time they had 700 applications for clinical trials for novel gene therapies and genome engineering. The pipeline is massive, and they actually are not prepared for what needs to get done for being able to prosecute just the already existing therapy pipelines that are coming down the We have some highlights. In addition to everything I talked about for 2020, we're also going to have a fully accredited continuing medical education accreditation through Mayo for any of you that are interested, or you have physician partners that are interested in understanding about gene editing in the clinic. We are partnering with the Rosalind Franklin Society, and we're going to give the Rosalind Franklin Society medal for honoring science, great science in the space. And actually, we're actually be celebrating what would be Dr. Franklin's 100th birthday on July 25th, 2020. It's going to be totally exciting and fun. Just the last little bit, I want to add this. So there was a conversation we had at the working group. The public trust that scientists work for the good of society is actually growing. These are a Pew article, but there's some key content. The public confidence falters on questions of scientific transparency and integrity. I actually think it's very important. I don't think the scientists, you think a lot about this. And so I'm not accusing, it's important. I'm going to go through this, I've been this idea a few times. I'm not accusing you of not having integrity. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that I think you can set a set of bars, and we should set a set of bars for what that means, and it should be functional. It shouldn't just be, oh, go have good integrity. It actually should have consequences when you're not being integrated. And this came out of my Carl Zimmer's talk, because ethics failures in science have real consequences. And I can't give you a bigger example of this than actually Charles Davenport. Who knows who Charles Davenport is in this room? He was director of the Cold Spring Harbor. This was a big researcher around the turn of the 19th into the 20th century, right? 1900, all right? Okay. He was a scientist. He published on the cover of Science. He published a whole series of papers, and they were all fraudulent. Okay? He was never, right? He led to the eugenics movement. He was never held accountable. What do I mean by that? He had public funding until 1939. He had private funding until 1944 when he died. Despite all of his fraudulent scenario and those eugenics and getting the whole horrors of what's happening in the first half of the 20th century, we as scientists, as a community, did not hold him accountable. We're living in that time. Those of us that are living in gene editing, the scenario, right? So I'll tell you what we did. We took that energy and we put it in space, and I happened to take over as dean of the graduate school at Mayo. We had some opportunities, and so Mayo's mission, this is just one of our mission statements, just to inspire hope and contribute to health and well-being by providing the best care to every patient through integrated clinical practice, education, and research. And at that core is adherence to the highest standards of professionalism, ethics, and personal responsibility worthy of the trust our patients place in us. We have a PhD program. It's a small but focused PhD program, really in the biomedical sciences. And so we adapted what is a long oath to a really short 45-word oath. We call it the scientist oath. And I'm just telling you what it is, and I'm not explaining, but it's really simple. I will, as a member of the scientific community, I pledge that I will conduct myself at all times with personal integrity. So I will not lie to others. I will perform my professional activities with the highest rigor. I will not lie to myself. And I will work for the advancement of all humanity. The focus will be on emphasizing the value of science. And by pronouncing this, I commit myself to these standards and goals, and I wear my badge. This was our 3D printed badge that talks about integrity, rigor, and for all. And really focused on what this means. So why do we need it? Why do we need this now? We need it now because of tools like the accessibility of CRISPR going everywhere. As despite this bad scenario, I actually think there is a worse consequence, and it's happening. This is a paper came out in 2019. Do pigmentation in the melatonin coordinate system regulate aggression and sexuality in humans? And they actually argue that the color of your skin determines whether your IQ. That's in the abstract of this paper in 2019. It's not a typo. That's not a 1919 paper. It's a 2019 paper. And I think there actually is a worse consequence than what happened there if you add a Davenport to what's going on in China. And I think that we live in it, and those of us in the room, this is a responsibility, and we need to deal with this. Davenport was not appropriately dealt with, and we risk reproducing that failure if we don't take charge of it. So I took the oath on July 2nd, 2019. This is my class. We were all standing up. I was at the side, my hand appraised. This is an open invitation to join me in that oath if you are interested. Again, I'm not saying that you are not doing science with integrity, but I think making the statement of the oath is holding ourselves accountable is a key concept that I think we as scientists, especially in areas that have huge potential implications, we should be taking. That doesn't mean don't be creative. It just means putting it. Okay, so the Genome Writers Guild, we have a website that is solely adding material, educational material, partnerships with the ARRIGE and the Japan Genome Editing Society. And I encourage and invite any of you to come to our meeting July 23rd and 25th in Rochester, Minnesota. In July, weather is fantastic in Minnesota, and I look forward to seeing you there and love to take any questions. Thank you.